All right, moving on to section 2. We're going to be looking at potential problems and biases that we have within our samples. Okay, so that's what we're going to be looking at. Last section, we talked about all our different types of sampling that we have. And then today we're going to be talking about biases and other problems that we could have with these. So first off, let's talk about what a bias is. So a bias in a sample is systematically not representative of the desired population. Okay, so a bias occurs when it systematically does not follow the entire population, not by chance. So, like, that's why simple random sample usually has no biases in it, because your system is everything gets thrown into a big pot, you shake it up, and you pull them out. Your systematically, you're not hurting a certain group, okay, or a certain population. Everybody's got the same amount of chance, okay? So that's what a bias is that something in the system in which you are gathering your information, there is a problem and a group is not being represented or is overrepresented. So the first thing is volunteer responses. So voluntary responses are terrible. They're really, really bad. And the reason for that is because basically if you just go and ask for people to and ask them to respond to you and on a volunteer basis, what ends up happening is that you only get people with that hard one way or the other way responses. And you don't get that group in the middle, what some people call the silent majority, who, we don't really care. It's not that big of a deal. I'm not going to go out of my way to respond to this. And so that you lose that middle group. Okay. So, or for some reason, they can't respond to it. Okay. There's your volunteer response. Okay. So a group isn't represented because since it's volunteer and they don't think it's that important, they're not going to voice their opinion. Next up is undercoverage. Undercoverage is basically when a certain population group is left out when you're doing your sample. And this could be because of whatever reason. You're not going to that part of the city, or you're asking for people to respond on emails, and a lot of people aren't using their emails. The example here is going back to the census. So with the census, a lot of immigrants from Latin American countries back in the 90s would not want to return their census questionnaire because they didn't want any involvement with the government, because they just wanted to be left alone, so they just wouldn't respond it. So people from Latin American countries were always underrepresented from it. And it's undercoverage because you're missing out on that group. Okay. That's what an undercoverage is basically there's a certain group that in your system in which you're gathering your data, they are not being represented for some reason. Okay. Non-response is another major one, and this is, again, people just not answering a questionnaire that's sent out. So this could be that people just refuse to respond. It could be that they just don't want to respond. It's kind of like the volunteer one. They're very similar. But the non-response is more of, we sent out 100 but only got 23 back, like the example on the bottom. It's not a volunteer, hey, we want you to respond if you want to. It's a, hey, I sent all this out, I haven't gotten anything back. That is a non-response bias. Okay, and that can be an issue because for some reason you've got a bunch of people that aren't responding. And who knows what the reason might be. It might be that, you're sending out emails to people that don't really check their emails, or you're sending out letters to them and then they have to do all this stuff and then they have to send it in. It could be something that they have to pay to do their response, and people don't want to do that. So that's where you have your non-response bias. Okay. It's basically, I send out all of this, I get hardly any back. That's your non-response bias. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to talk about within response bias, there's some subgroups. So with our response bias, we have some subgroups in here, and this is mostly based off of the behavior of the interviewer or the interviewee, whoever's answering the question or asking the question, okay? And those can just be some built-in biases just by how the questions are worded or even said. All right, so the first one we have here is our untruthful answers. This is basically people lying. When they get asked a question, they lie. And there's no way for you to tell if people are lying or tell them, hey, you have to tell the truth. You can't force people to do that. So this is one that you just hope that whatever the questions that you're asking and the people you're asking the questions to, they respond truthfully to you. And you're just hoping that's happening. These could be based off of, it could be a sensitive question, how often do you drink alcohol? How often do you do drugs? How often do you smoke? Things that might not be socially acceptable. Those type of questions in which what they might really believe is this is what I think. They're not going to say that because they don't want people to judge them. Because nobody wants to be judged poorly because of something that's happened or what their response is. So that's why they don't want to get canceled. And so because they don't want to get canceled, they're not going to tell what their true feelings are. That's your untruthful answer. Okay, and so there's an example down there at the bottom for that. Just ignorance. So just giving an incorrect answer because you just don't know. You think this is the right answer because it sounds right to you, but it's actually not even close. And the example on the bottom is a perfect example of this, where Princeton ranks their people rank business programs as their Princeton's business program as one of the best in the country, but they don't have a business program. Like that type of stuff. Just because Princeton, the college, is that's great, or it's this Ivy League school. Oh, if they have a business program, it must be great. Well, they actually don't even have one. So that's where your ignorance can come in, because you go, well, this is what I think it is, even though it's not. Next up is just lack of memory, which is giving a wrong answer because you just don't remember exactly. It could be something like if, high schoolers, if I asked you, hey, what grades did you get when you were in third grade or fourth grade or fifth grade? You probably don't remember exactly what it is. You could ballpark it, but the further away you get from that time, the less likely you're going to know exactly. The example on the bottom here is about GPA. If you ask me what my GPA is, I could probably ballpark it. I don't know the exact number of what it was when I was in high school, but I think I could be close. But, based off of this, most people usually are a little are more likely to be over their GPA than under their GPA. And that's just because you just forget. Your memory just starts to go away after a while. It just happens. So next up after that is timing. Okay, so the timing of the question is also fairly important, because let's say if I ask people what's your favorite sport, and I ask it around the Super Bowl, most people, or during NFL playoffs, a lot of people are going to say football is their favorite sport. If I ask it during March Madness, a lot of people are going to say, oh, college basketball. Man, I love college basketball. If I ask it during the Olympics, people are going to be, oh, well, I remember this, this Olympic sport is a lot fun, or is very fun to watch, anything like that. So the timing in which you ask questions can also impact people's answers, because they're going to think about what's right in front of me. What have I seen lately about this? Okay. And it's just how people are. And you have to remember that when you're making these studies, is going, okay, is the timing of this question important? So anytime that let's say there's a major national thing that happened, and then people ask questions, well, everybody's going to be positive or negative about it because it's right up front. But give it 2 years and you ask the same question, and you're going to get probably a more accurate to what the general population's thought on that would be, because it's been X number of years since. Okay, so the timing in which you ask these questions is fairly important. Last one here is phrasing. So how you phrase a question could have a big difference in the results of the question. So example for this, should the president have line item vetoes to eliminate waste? Okay, that question right there, most people say yes. The president should be able to have line item vetoes to eliminate waste. Because when they hear that question, they're thinking specifically, if they get this line item veto, the reason they're using it is to eliminate waste. Well, I like that. I want them to eliminate waste. But if you take out that eliminate waste part and you just said, should they have line item veto, most people, or not as many people, will say yes to that because they don't think of it being just waste. They start going, oh, what else could the president use that veto on? They could use it on this or that. Whatever. Then they start weighing it back and forth and going, no, I don't think they should have it because of something that they picture in their mind as being more important. But if you plant that seed of eliminating waste is the key thing, that's what their mind's going to focus on. Okay, and so that's why phrasing is fairly important in answering your questions. All right, so sampling error, just in general, all samples you do will have sampling error. If you do not do a census, you will have sampling error. And basically what a sampling error is when you take a sample, it's not going to be the exact result of what the population is. Okay, there's going to be an error based on variation. If I take a sample today I ask 30 students about something, and then a week later I asked 30 other random students something, I'm going to get not the exact same percentages from them. And that's because every sample is different depending on who gets picked or what they're thinking at the time. And that's where your sampling error occurs. Example for this is if you put 50 red and 50 green balls in a single bag, you shake it up and you take 30 out. When you do that, you end up with a 15-18 split. Should be 50-50 or 1-1, but it's not. That is your error. It happens, and we try to correct that or we mention it. The best way to minimize a sampling error, get a bigger sample. The more of these balls in this bag, the closer I get to 100 that I pick, the better that ratio is going to occur. Same thing like if you're flipping a coin. If you flip a coin once, it's either going to be heads or tails. If I flip it twice, it could be heads, heads, tails, tails, heads, tails, or tails, heads. Okay? Only 2 of those out of the 4 are a 50-50 split. But the more I flip, it's going to that percentage becomes more spread out. Last one is a non-sampling error, which is the one that we want to avoid. This is bad. All those biases that we talked about in the beginning of this, that's what these are. Non-sampling errors are errors that occur because you collected your data incorrectly, you recorded it or analyzed it incorrectly, and it's not random it's not random chance that caused the error. It is a systematic error that you had. Okay, so the example below is about a teacher asking about the change in policy. If they stand outside of the gym or out of the library and get it, it's very different from what the entire population, because of the convenient sampling that they did. So what you got to do is you want to avoid these non-sampling errors. Make sure that you avoid all these biases. Make sure that if there is something that you do have a sampling error, make sure it is a chance error, not a systematic bias that you have built into your system. All right? Okay, that's the end of this section. We'll be moving on to section 3 after this, which is going to be talking about experiments.